Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon the time zone you are in. My name is Deepthi Goguri. Today, I would like to present on the topic life cycle of a query in SQL Server. Before starting the session, I would like to thank Asan for giving me this wonderful opportunity to speak for SQL Saturday Bangladesh. It's really an honor. So before beginning, let me introduce myself a little bit. As Chaudhary already introduced myself, I would like to skip this part. I would like to mention a very quick part. Like, if you have any questions regarding this session later, you can always contact me on Twitter or through email. You can find those details here.
Yes.
Yeah. So let me go ahead and begin the session. So today we are going to talk about the life cycle of a query in SQL Server. So basically, this session is all about SQL Server internals and architecture. We are mainly focusing on the life cycle of a query, like what happens behind the scenes whenever a query gets submitted to the SQL Server. So there is a lot of content to grab. Hopefully you like it. So let's get started. I would like to thank each and every sponsor for sponsoring this event. Without your help and support, this event would not have been possible. So what are we going to discuss in this session today? We are going to see the basic asset properties, like asset properties of transactions, like each and every transaction for the relational databases should ensure the asset property. And we are going to see a very simple example ensuring this asset property. We are also going to see the different types of memory components we have in the memory architecture of SQL Server. In this particular session, we are going in deep into plan cache and the buffer pool and how these cache get managed inside the SQL Server. We are also going to see the life cycle of a query for read as well as the write transactions, like what happens behind the scenes when a query is submitted to the SQL Server. We are also going to see the different components we have in the SQL engine. That's relational engine components as well as the storage engine components. So internals, why should we actually care, right? Even without knowing the internals, we can just go ahead and do our daily jobs. But what will happen if you know the internals, right? Many DBAs and developers, they work with SQL Server on daily basis, but might not exactly understand what happens behind the scenes whenever a query is submitted to SQL Server. So knowing this information will help you in knowing how queries gets processed at each stage inside the SQL engine. It will also help you in tracking down the performance issues very quickly and fix them efficiently. It will also build you the confidence while managing the SQL databases and SQL engine. It will also help you in convincing your manager or coworkers of why they have to take your ideas seriously. Last but not least, we work with SQL Server every day. So the more we know about the internals, the better we can understand how SQL engine works behind the scenes. Let's start with basics, right? The asset properties. Every major relational engine, it can be the SQL Server, Oracle, PostgreSQL, Sybase. All these major relational engines should satisfy the asset properties of transactions. Now, what is this asset? A stands for atomicity. Atomic meaning a single unit of work. A single transaction can contain one operation or it can contain multiple operations in it. All the operations inside every single transaction should either complete successfully or none of them. For example, let's take a store procedure and we have two operations inside that particular store procedure, the update statement as well as an insert statement in it. Whenever you execute that store procedure, both the operations inside that transaction should either complete successfully or none of them. For example, if the update succeeds and if the insert fails, then SQL Server should go ahead and roll back the entire transaction. That's atomicity. C stands for consistency. The data inside the database should always be consistent before starting the transaction and after completing the transaction. For example, if I wanted to do an update statement on a table, while doing that update, if something happens suddenly, like if there is a power outage and if we had to restart the SQL Server, once we restart the SQL Server, this uncommitted transaction should be completely rolled back, making the data in the consistent state. That's consistency. I stands for isolation. No matter how many concurrent transactions are happening at the same time, each and every transaction should be independent of each other and without interfering with any other transaction. Like for example, I wanted to do an insert into a table, right? Bunch of records into a table. While I'm doing that insert, none of the other transactions which are running concurrently should be interfering with my transaction. That's isolation. D stands for durability. Once the transaction is successfully completed and all the data has already been made to the database should be permanent. Like for example, if we had to restart the SQL Server later at some point of time, then all the data that has already been made to the database should be permanent without any data loss. That's durability. So what components of the SQL engine will ensure the ACID property? Atomicity is very easy to be ensured. It is taken care by the parse component inside the relational engine. Consistency is also very easy to be ensured. It is taken care by the parser and binder components inside the relational engine. Inside the The isolation part is all about the logging mechanism. It is taken care by the log manager inside the storage engine. Durability is the most toughest of all. It is taken care by the transaction log inside the storage engine. So once the atomicity, isolation, and durability are ensured, consistency will automatically be ensured for the transaction. So let's see a very simple example ensuring these ACID properties. For example, let's take a simple bank transaction in this particular example. And in that particular simple bank transaction, we have two operations in it, right? For example, I have a balance of $500 in my balance, and for my account is ID1, and I would like to send $100 to my friend's account, which have an ID of 2. Now, this particular transaction have two operations in it, right? First, we have to deduct $100 from my balance, which is $500. And then the next operation is to credit $100 to my friend's account. So this particular transaction can be done in multiple ways, right? We can use the online application, or even we can use the mobile phone application to do that. So in this scenario, let's take a mobile phone application to do that. So once I begin the transaction on my mobile phone, SQL Server will also begin the transaction behind the scenes. So the first operation inside that particular transaction is to deduct $100 from my balance, right? So that's the first operation, which makes out of $400 in my balance. The second operation inside the same transaction should be to credit $100 to my friend's account. But I suddenly see this on my screen. I am logged out of the mobile phone application and I see this alert saying facility is temporarily unavailable. Now what has happened? I'm in between the transaction. I do not know if I lost my $100 or if my friend has received $100. So I immediately called her and asked if she received any money, which she said she didn't. So I immediately called the bank customer service guys to know what has happened. They said there was a severe thunderstorm and some of their SQL Server went down and they already restarted them. Now, just think what should happen for this particular transaction if this transaction should ensure the ACID property, right? Let's see what will happen once they restart the SQL Server. So once the SQL Server restarted, that particular uncommitted transaction is completely rolled back, making the data in the consistent state. Now, this particular transaction is ensuring the ACID properties of transaction. Now, how? Atomicity is ensured by rolling back the entire transaction. The consistency is ensured by reflecting the $500 in my balance, which is the initial amount before starting the transaction. The isolation is also ensured. Like, did you observe when SQL Server went ahead and deduct $100 from my balance? None of the other transactions were interfering with my transaction, right? The isolation is also ensured. The durability part is also ensured. I did not lose my money. I have that $100 back into my account, which is reflecting in my balance right now, which is $500. So that's how each and every individual transaction for all these relational databases should ensure the ACID property. Now let's see the overview of memory architecture and what components we have inside the memory of the SQL Server. So SQL Server Engine is a Windows program which will use Windows APIs to allocate memory to the SQL Server. Now there are different types of components we have in the memory architecture of SQL Server. In this particular session, we are mainly focusing on the plan cache and the buffer pool and how those cache get managed. But let's see what other components we have in the SQL Server memory, right? The first component, plan cache, which is one of the bigger components. It stores the store procedures, query plans, etc. The buffer pool, which is the major component of the SQL Server. It holds the 8 KB data pages and the index pages in it. There are also other type of cache like log cache, token and perm user store cache. Now what this token and perm user store cache does is it will store the user permissions onto the objects. Now there is also other type of cache known as column store cache, which stores the column store indexes in it. Now all these cache which you are seeing in the blue color are very special. Now why I say that? They are very special because they have a backing mechanism in them. When there is a memory pressure, since they have a backing mechanism, all the objects inside these type of cache will be sent to their storage systems. But what about the fixed memory, which you are seeing in the green color? Fixed memory is known as fixed because it cannot be expanded or shrinked when there is a memory pressure. Now, what type of components are stored inside this fixed memory? The connections to the SQL Server, like the memory GRAN connections for the hashes and sorts, those kind of connections are stored in the fixed memory. Now, the fixed memory cannot be expanded and shrinked because there is no backing mechanism in them. There is also other type of cache known as SQL Server.exe overhead cache. Now, as you know, the SQL Server.exe is an executable, and many things will be running this executable, right? Like, for example, the thread stacks. There is also other type of memory known in memory OLTP. Now, even this type of memory is a fixed memory. That means it cannot be expanded or shrinked when there is a memory pressure. Now, there should be other process which should be kicked in and clean up all these tables inside this in-memory OLTP such that we have space for the newer object to be stored inside this particular cache. So that's the overview of the memory architecture. Now let's see how this plan cache and the buffer pool gets managed inside the SQL Server. Now there is something known as LRUK algorithm, which is also known as least recently used algorithm. The -K is for the complexity of the code. Now what is this LRU? LRU meaning if something is staying in the cache for the longer time, those kind of things will be discarded first. But what happens with the SQL Server? SQL Server will think this way. If there is an execution plan which is taking less amount of resources to get created, those kind of execution plans will be discarded first. But if there is a more complicated execution plan, then those kind of plans will have more options to stay inside the cache for longer time. Now, how does this memory gets managed, right? There are two types of process which will manage the plan cache. One is the lazy writer and the other is ghost cleanup. Now let's see how these two process works. Now this is my plan cache, and the right side diagram which you are seeing is my plan cache, which is really small. We just have 3 execution plans in it, the plan 1, plan 2 and plan 3. Now each and every object inside the plan cache, we have two numbers at the bottom of each object. The left side number is known as complexity code value and the right side number is known as complexity countdown value. Now what happens when the lazy writer kicks in, right? The lazy writer will be kicked in every minute by the SQL Server automatically. Now once it gets kicked in every minute, what it does is it will go ahead and see if there are any least recently used execution plans. Once it finds them, it will go ahead and decrement the complexity countdown value by 1 on each object it thought that it did not get used. So here in our example, none of them will be used. So what the lazy writer does is we'll go ahead and decrement the plan 1 complexity countdown value from 18 to 17, for the plan 2 from 9 to 8, and for the plan 3 from 2 to 1. And then the lazy writer will go away. In the very next minute, the lazy writer will kick back in again to see if there are any least recently used execution plans. In our example, none of them will be used again. So what the lazy writer does is, we'll go ahead and decrement the plan 1 complexity countdown value from 17 to 16, for the plan 2 from 9 to 7, and for the plan 3 from 1 to 0. Now, did you observe the plan 3 complexity countdown value has changed to 0? That means the SQL Server should go ahead and discard this plan 3 out of the cache, right? But that is not what it is going to happen. There is some other process known as ghost cleanup, which will be kicked in every few minutes by the SQL Server automatically. Now, what it does is, it will go ahead and flag all these execution plans with no countdown value as ghosted. That means they are still in the plan cache, but they are in the half-life. Now, for example, if there is a memory pressure tomorrow, then the ghost cleanup on its regular process, it will come, right? It will come and it will take these ghosted execution plans out of the cache, and it will evict them out of the cache. But if there is no memory pressure, then in that particular scenario, these execution plans are still going to stay in the plan cache, such that there might be some other user who will be coming and using the same execution plan for his query later, right? That's how the ghost cleanup works. In the very next minute, the lazy writer will kick back in again to see if there are any least recently used execution plans. In our example, the plan 2 will be used. So what the lazy writer does is, it will go ahead and change the plan 2 complexity countdown value to its original value, which is 9. So that's how the plan cache gets managed by lazy writer and the ghost cleanup. Now let's see how the buffer pool gets managed. Basically, the buffer pool holds the 8 KB data pages as well as an index pages in it. So buffer pool has to manage 3 kinds of different structures: the heap tables, clustered indexes, and non-clustered indexes. So if for example you wanted to do a select star from a heap table, you know what will happen. The buffer pool has to go and grab those data pages into its buffer pool, do the operations over there, which is like very IO intensive and resource consuming, right? And if you put the indexes on the top of those heap tables, it will help reduce the IO, right? And also it will speed up the query process. Now, how does this buffer pool gets managed? Buffer pool gets managed by a process known as checkpoint process. What it does is, it will go ahead and check if there are any dirty pages inside the buffer pool, right? Now, what are these dirty pages? Dirty pages are the pages which are already written inside the buffer pool, but they are not yet hardened them onto the database file system. Now, what this checkpoint process does is, it will be executed automatically by the SQL Server for every few minutes. So it will go ahead and push back these dirty pages onto the database file system and harden them onto the disk file system. That's how the checkpoint process works to manage the buffer pool. Now let's see how the SQL optimizer chooses the plan. As you know, the SQL optimizer is a cost-based optimizer, and it always wanted to choose the good enough plan instead of the best plan. Now, what is the difference? The time as well as the cost is the difference. For example, if the optimizer wanted to choose the best plan instead of the good enough plan, what it have to do, right? Let's see with an example. Like here, you have an example of a very simple select statement with a 4-table join in it, right? So in order to choose the best plan, then the good enough plan, the optimizer has to first go ahead and analyze 72 different types of physical access methods per table, right? Here we have 4-table join, right? 72 times 4, those many physical access methods per table. That means the optimizer has to go ahead and choose whether it have to do the clustered index scan or seek, those kind of physical access methods, 72 per table. On the top of it, it have to go ahead and analyze 24 different types of logical join orders just for this very simple select statement. Now, what are these logical join orders? Like we have a select statement here, right? For example, the join between A to B will filter out 70% of the records from the result set. And the join between B to C will filter out 90% of the records from the result set. Then in that particular scenario, the optimizer will go ahead and reorder the join in such a way that it will push back the join between B to C, front of the statement, and the rest of the joins, that is A to B, back of it. Now, why the optimizer do that is because it wanted to grab the results as quickly as possible. And on the top of it, the optimizer has to go ahead and analyze so many transformation rules, at least some thousands of them. And out of all of these transformation rules, it will grab approximately 26,000 possible plans to choose a best plan for this simple select statement. So just imagine how much IO intensive and cost consuming it is to get the best plan for this select statement, simple select statement. And no user want to wait for such long time to get a best plan, right? So instead of going ahead and analyzing each and every transformation rule, the optimizer will go ahead and analyze some of the transformation rule until it gets the good enough plan. Once it gets the good enough plan, it will go ahead and save that plan inside the plan cache and use that plan for the execution phase. Now, I would like to thank Kevin Klein for loaning me this example. If I have to tell the same concept in a very simple words, if the optimizer for a query, if it go ahead and think the execution plan A will be good in 3 milliseconds and the execution plan B in 3.5 milliseconds. But in order to know if the plan A is better or B is better, it have to go ahead and analyze like so many transformation rules for 5 minutes. The optimizer doesn't want to do that. It will go ahead and grab the plan A or plan B randomly. That's the reason why the optimizer is so quick. Now let's see the life cycle of a query. Now, if the life cycle of a query is divided into 3 different steps, then the first step contains the components parser, binder, simplification, and trivial plan. Now, these components from the first step are very lightweight to the SQL Server. It doesn't require much metadata at all, except for the query definition and the table definition. That's all it needs. When you come to the second step contains the components load metadata, join heuristics, and search phases. Now, these components from the second step, they gather almost all the metadata that it requires to process any query. When you come to the third step contains the components access method, transaction manager, and buffer manager. Now, when you compare with the other 2 steps, the first step and the second step, the third step components are IO intensive, resource consuming, because the buffer manager component have to go and grab the pages from the disk file system. That's the reason why it is very IO intensive. So the first step components and the second step components will come under the relational engine, and the third step component will come under the storage engine. Now let's see how the query gets processed behind the scenes. Let's see a very simple select query, right? For example, we have a user here who wanted to run a select statement onto the SQL Server. Now, no matter what kind of interface he is using, he can be using the SSMS Management Studio, Azure Data Studio, .NET Visual Studio, or even a third-party application. No matter what kind of interface he uses, he should first get the secure network connection to the SQL Server, right? Now, how does that happen? There is something known as SQL Server Network Interface, also known as SNI. Now, what this SNI does is it will secure a network connection between the SQL Server as well as the client. The client is our user here. Now, the SQL Server Network Interface will use the Internet Protocol to make this secure network connection. Now, we have different types of Internet protocols, right? The TCP, IP, shared memory, named pipes. No matter what kind of interface he uses, process remains the same. So once the secure network connection has been established between the SQL Server as well as the user, the query that the user is sending will be wrapped inside a tabular data stream packet. Now, once this tabular data stream packet is wrapped, that particular TDS packet will be given to the SQL operating system by SNI. Now, once the TDS packet has reached the SQL operating system, that coming connection will be identified as a SQL connection by the SQL operating system, and it will assign a SPID to it. You know the SPID, right? Whenever you do the SP2 or SP2, you see those SPIDs, SPID number 94, 105. Those are the SPIDs that are the active connections that are made to the SQL server. So once a SPID has been assigned, the TDS packet will be unwrapped and identified as a SQL query. Now that particular SQL query will be sent to the first step inside the relational engine, which is the parser, right? The first component is the parser. So what will happen at the parser component? Parser will identify the syntax of the query. Now, for example, if you wanted to do a select star from, by mistake, you have given select star from, then at this particular phase, the parser should identify that as a syntactical error and throw back the error to the user. Now, the variables are also identified here. If you are using any variables, if you are declaring any variables, whether you declared it properly or not, those kind of things are checked here. Views are also expanded here. Like if in your query, if you are using any view, then behind the scenes, the code text behind that view will be brought in line to the query which you are sending. So basically, the views get expanded. With all this information, what the parser does is it will put a hash on the query which we are sending, and it will go ahead and compare that hash of the execution plan inside the plan cache. If it finds the exact match, then it will go ahead and use the same execution plan for the execution phase. But what if it doesn't find any execution plan, right? The exact match? It will go ahead and build the initial logical tree at this particular phase. And now our query will be sent to the binder component. So binder is also known as algebraizer or normalizer. Now, what happens at the binder is the parser will identify the syntax of the query, but the binder is the one which will validate and identify the objects inside the objects as well as column, whether they are valid or not. Those kind of things are checked here. And user permissions are also checked here, whether the user that is running the query, whether he have enough permissions to execute those objects or not. Those kind of things are checked here. And data type resolution also happens here. Now, for example, if you're running a very simple select query between two tables and you are using a union all clause in between, then the ordinal columns of those two tables should be matched in their data type. I will show you this particular scenario in our demo. Aggregate bindings also happens here, whether your sum, average, those kind of things are bound here. With all this information, the parse tree inside the plan cache is once again updated, and then our query will be sent to the simplification component. As the name itself says, simplification will simplify the query. Now, for example, if you have a select statement with a subquery in it, simplification component will go ahead and it will convert that subquery into a simple join. Now, contradiction detection also happens at this phase. For example, if you have a foreign key contradiction, those kind of things are checked here. With all this information, the parse tree inside the plan cache is once again updated, and then our query will be sent to the trivial plan component. Now, what happens at this trivial plan component, right? If you are sending a very simple query like select star from or a select star from a table with a simple where clause, those kind of queries are identified by the SQL server as very simple. And what it thinks is like this. This is such an easy query. Why should I even go ahead and update the parse tree inside the plan cache that these other components has been built until now? I'll just go ahead and discard that parse tree inside the plan cache that has been built until now. And I will just create the trivial plan on the fly because it doesn't cost it much. It doesn't cost any resources. So it will go ahead and create the trivial plan on the fly. And it will use that trivial plan for the execution phase. But what if our query is not so simple? What if our query has 10 tables in it with a complicated logic in it? Then SQL Server will identify that as a complicated query, and it wanted to create the full plan for it. So that particular query will be now sent to the second step inside the relational engine. Now the first component inside the second step is load metadata. Now most of the metadata that has been gathered to process any query will be gathered at this component, like index statistics and histograms are gathered here. The statistics are the block structures which are created inside the system tables, which will describe the distribution of the data inside a column or set of the columns of a table. Those kind of things are gathered here. Auto create statistics also happens here. Like for example, if you are doing a select statement very frequently and searching on a column very frequently, and that particular column is doesn't have any index on it, and is not a key column inside an index, then in that particular scenario, SQL Server will go ahead and auto create statistics on that particular column. And cardinality estimates are gathered here. The cardinality meaning how many rows that the optimizer think it is going to come back out of each operator inside the query tree. Those kind of things are gathered here. And SQL Server and Windows collation are checked here. Set options are also checked here. For example, if you are using a set XML on or off, set ANSI padding on or off, depending upon the on or off, the query plan might be dependent. With all this information, the parse tree inside the plan cache is once again updated, and then our query will be now sent to the join heuristic component. Now, in the previous slide, I have discussed about this logical join order thing, but let me explain here again. For example, if we have a select statement with a 3-table join in it, and the join between A to B will filter out like 70% of the records from the result set, and the join between B to C will filter out around 99% of the records from the result set. Then the optimizer will go ahead and reorder the join in such a way that it will push back the join between B to C front of the statement and the join between A to B back of it. Now, why the optimizer does that is because it wanted to grab the results as quickly as possible. Now, with this information, the parse tree inside the plan cache is once again updated, and then our query will be sent to the search phases. Now, in the very next slide, I'm going to discuss what these search phases are. But for now, just remember that the optimizer always wanted to choose the good enough plan instead of the best plan, right? Now, how it chooses is from these 3 phases: phase 0, phase 1, and phase 2. Once it finds a good enough plan from there, it will go ahead and update that plan in the plan cache. And then our query will be sent to the third step, which is the storage engine component, right? But before going into the storage engine, let's see what these search phases are. Now the phase 0, like no matter what kind of query we are running, optimizer has to always go ahead and grab the good enough plan from these 3 phases. The phase 0 is known as the transaction plan. And also these plans are generated at the pre-optimization stage. Now, what are these pre-optimization stage, right? The components from the first step that we discussed, the parser, binder, simplification, and the trivial plan, those components will come under the pre-optimization stage. That means the trivial plans are generated here, right? And then these queries, like these execution plans, are created as quickly as possible for the very simple queries, like with maximum of 3 tables in it. And they need very less metadata. Right? They need basic heuristics to generate these execution plans. But when you come to the phase 1 is also known as quick plan. Now, these kind of execution plans are generated for maximum of 8 tables, a query with maximum of 8 tables. More transformation rules are needed than the phase 0. Now, what happens with phase 0 and phase 1 is the optimizer will take the query that we are submitting, and it will go ahead and compare our query with already existing execution shapes. If it finds the good enough plan from there, it will go ahead and grab that execution plan. But that is not the case with the phase 2. Phase 2 is also known as full plan. Now, the full plans are generated for more complicated queries. Most of the parallelism spills to TempDB happen at this phase. and almost all the transformation rules are unlocked here. Now, what happens at this phase 2 is the optimizer, it will go ahead and prune off all the transformation rules that we are not using in our query. Now, what I mean by that, for example, we are not using the data type like nvarchar max, right? So the optimizer will first go ahead and prune off all the transformation rules which are related to that nvarchar max, such that it will go ahead and analyze some of the transformation rules to get that good enough plan as quickly as possible. That's how these optimizer will go ahead and get the execution plan from these three phases. Now our query is at the storage engine component, right? The third step. Now before going into these component, let's remember that no matter what kind of query it is, it can be read, write. All of those queries should be it should pass from first step as well as the second step, right? Depending upon the complication. If the query is so simple that the trivial plan got generated, then the trivial plan will be sent to the execution phase from the first step directly to the storage engine. But if the query is complicated, then that particular query should be passed through the second step, right? The second step and then to the storage engine, which is the third step here. So all the difference happens here in the storage engine is at the transaction manager component as well as the buffer manager component. Now let's see what will happen with the read transaction, right? Now the first component here is the access methods. The access methods, it doesn't do any operation by itself, but all it does is to analyze how it have to grab the results from the disk file system. That's all it does. When our query will be now sent to the transaction manager component. Inside the transaction manager, we have two more components in it, the transaction log component as well as the log manager component. Now, as this is a read transaction, the transaction manager will go ahead and invoke the log manager part of it, but not the log manager. You know why, right? This is a read transaction. We are not making any modification to the database pages inside the buffer pool. So that's the reason we do not have to invoke any log manager. But the transaction manager will request the buffer manager to put a shared lock on the resources that it needs to get the results. Now, why shared lock is because this is a read transaction. We do not want to block any other transactions, right? Now, once the query has reached the buffer manager, it will go ahead and first put the shared lock on the resources it needs to process the query. And then it will go ahead and grab those pages from the buffer pool. Like if it will go ahead and check if all those pages are already inside the buffer pool. If it didn't find some of them or all of them, it will go ahead and grab those pages in the form of 8 KB pages from the database file system, put them in the buffer pool, do the operation over there, and send the results to the user. That's how the read transaction works. Very simple. But what happens with the write transactions, right? As you know, the access methods by itself, it doesn't do any operation, but it will just have to analyze how it have to grab the results from the disk file system. But once the query is now sent to the transaction manager, the transaction manager will now invoke the transaction log component first. Because this is a write transaction, before writing anything onto the database files inside the buffer pool, first we have to write those changes into the transaction log. Once those changes are written to the transaction log, then the transaction manager will now invoke the log manager part of it, and it will request the buffer manager to put an exclusive lock on the resources that it needs to process the query. Now, once the query has now sent to the buffer manager, now the buffer manager will first put the exclusive lock on the resources it needs. Now, why exclusive? Because this is the write transaction and we do not want any other transactions to be interfering with our transaction, right? And then once it put the exclusive lock on the resources, it will go ahead and check if all those data pages, all those resources that it needs are already in the buffer pool. If it didn't find some of them or all of them, it will go ahead and grab those pages in the form of 8 KB, just like the read transaction, put them in the buffer pool, do the modifications over there, and send the success message to the user. Now, did you observe the databases are already modified in the buffer pool, but they are not hardened them onto the database file system, right? That's when the checkpoint process will get kicked in. It will go ahead and grab these dirty pages and harden them onto the database file system. That's how the write transaction work. Now let's see the demo of how these pre-optimization stages works behind the scenes, like the parser, binder, simplification, and the trivial plan. It's a very quick demo, doesn't take much time. Let me go ahead and share my. Chaudhary, can you see my SSMS Management Studio? Can you please confirm?
We can see your screen on
Management Studio, yes. Right?
Studio, you're seeing.
Thank you. So for this demo, I'm using AdventureWorks 2016 database. Let me put the database in the context. And first, let me show you how the parse only option works. The parse only option will just invoke the parser. You can parse the query in two different ways. You can set the parse only option on, or you can also use the icon here, the parse icon. What it does is when you enable that, it will just parse the query. It doesn't execute the results, or it doesn't generate any execution plan. Now, I wanted to do a very I want to parse a very simple query. Now, the syntax is perfectly all right. So when I execute it, it should not throw me an error. But here, when you observe, I did not declare the variable, but I'm still using it in the where clause. Now, in this particular scenario, it should throw me an error because the parser will also identify the variables, right? Now, what if I do select non-existing column from a non-existing table, right? When I execute that, it should not throw me an error because parser will just identify the syntax. Syntax-wise, this is perfect, but the columns and tables are not existing. That's when the binder will kick in, right? The binder will identify that. Now let me turn off the parse only option off. And let me turn on the format only option on. Now this particular format only option, when I turn it on, both the binder as well as the parser will be invoked. So let me turn on that format only option. Can you please mute the phone, mute the voice, please? We can hear the voice. Thank you. So this is a very simple select statement. I just want to validate the objects as well as the columns. Each and every object is validated and they are there. So when I execute that particular query, it should not throw me an error. At the same time, it doesn't execute the results as well as it doesn't create the execution plan because this is just parsing and binding, right? Now, I would like to execute the same query, select non-existing column from a non-existing table. But this time when I execute it, it should throw me an error because the binder component kicked in, right? It should validate the objects as well as the columns. Now let me turn off this format only option off. Now the format only option is deprecated, but still for this demo I'm using, and we can use it right until they completely remove it. Now let me show you how the data type resolution works. Like I explained to you that I will show in the demo, right? So we have a select statement between two tables. The ordinal column of these two tables should match in their data type. Now the customer ID is of an integer data type. Sales order ID is also of an integer data type. Now when I execute this particular query, it should produce the results, right? But what if I manually created a data type resolution, right? Error. The customer ID here is of an integer data type, but the credit card approval code is now of a different data type, right? The varchar. So when I execute this particular query, it should now throw me an error saying the conversion failed. Right? That's how the data type resolution happens at at the binder component. Now let's see how the simplification works. Right? For this demo, we are using again, let me put the database in the context. And here we have a very simple subquery, right? A simple select statement which have a subquery in it. And now the simplification component will have to convert that subquery into a very simple join. Now let me enable the actual execution plan on. And when I execute this particular query and go ahead and see the execution plan, now did you observe it created the inner join? That means the subquery is converted into inner join. No matter how many times you run the subqueries, behind the scenes, those subqueries will be converted to simple joins. And it will also, the simplification also will remove any redundant tables that we are using in our query. In this select statement, we are getting only the columns from the sales order header table, but we are simply using the customer table here, right? We are not getting any results from there. So when I execute that particular query and see the execution plan, it will only grab the results from the sales order header table. It just removed the redundant table, which we are not using behind the scenes. Now let's see how the contradictions works. Here, this is a very simple select statement. I created a contradiction saying where territory ID is equal to 1 and where territory ID is not equal to 1. Now when I execute that, it should not produce any results, right? At the same time, it did not throw me an error because this is a pre-optimization stage and it doesn't know, like the optimizer doesn't know what value we are using. We can use the territory ID 1 or 1000, it doesn't know. And let's see how the trivial plan component works. Right? This is a very simple select query with a simple where clause. Now let's see what kind of plan gets created for this particular query. When I execute that, and if I go to the execution plan and do the properties on this particular select, now did you see the optimization level? It choose to be a trivial plan. Now the SQL Server thought this particular query is very simple, and no matter how many times we execute this particular query, those many times the trivial plans get generated because the SQL Server, for SQL Server, it's so lightweight, it can create trivial plans on the fly. And these trivial plans are not saved inside the plan cache by default. But what if there might be some scenarios, right? You always expect the SQL Server to generate the full plan, but in some scenarios, it will go ahead and create the trivial plan. But now you wanted to save that plan inside of your plan cache. But in order to save that plan, you have to make sure that the plan is full plan, right? So that it can be saved inside the plan cache. Now in that particular scenario, we have an option where you can enable the trace flag 8757. Now when you enable the trace flag on for that particular query, then the trivial plan will be converted into a full plan behind the scenes. Like when you execute this particular query and execute that with the trace flag on, and when you check the execution plan and do the properties on the select, now did you see the optimization level has been turned to full? Now this particular plan is saved inside the plan cache. But I would not recommend you to do this on production because there is a reason why SQL Server created a trivial plan, right? It doesn't cost it much. So it doesn't want to save those plans inside the plan cache because it wanted to use the same cache for the more complicated execution plans, right? That's how the simplification and trivial plan components work. Now let me very quickly hop back into my slides. Now, in the lifecycle of a query session, today we have gone through the overview of ACID properties of transaction with a very simple example ensuring the ACID properties. We have also gone through the overview of the memory architecture of SQL Server and how many components we have. And in this particular session, we have gone in deep into the plan cache and buffer pool and how these cache get managed. And we have also seen the lifecycle of a query for the read as well as the write transactions. And we have also seen the different types of components we have in the SQL engine. That's the relational engine as well as the storage engine. Now, in order to prepare for the presentation, I have followed these resources. If you want to know more in deep into the SQL Server internals and life cycle of a query, please follow these resources. And I would like to thank one more time. Thank you so much for giving me this wonderful opportunity, Ashan. I should especially thank you. It's always an honor to speak for SQL Saturday Bangladesh. Thank you so much. If you have any questions at this point of time, please shoot at me.